This is video 6J for the Year 7 Mathematics course. In this video, we're going to be covering the theory behind adding and subtracting fractions, under the topic of fractions. Specifically, we are going to explore a visual representation of adding and subtracting fractions, adding and subtracting fractions with the same denominator, adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators, and then we're going to cover some example questions. Alrighty, so what we're going to be starting now and progressing in the next few videos about will be the ideas of operating with fractions. So in this video, we're going to be starting off with the idea of adding and subtracting fractions. So in order to introduce this idea, I would like you to consider the following. Let's say I gave you a square that I'm now going to separate into 9 equal pieces. And I'm going to say that 2 of these pieces are yellow, and then that 3 of these pieces are blue. So what we would therefore say here is that the fraction of the entire thing, which is colored yellow, would be 2 pieces out of the 9. And then with the blue, we would say that we've got 3 pieces out of the 9. However, if we were to also consider the total amount colored, then we can see that we've got 5 pieces in total out of 9. What do we notice the connection between these 3 fractions? We notice that 2 plus 3 is equal to 5, and then that all 3 of these fractions have the exact same denominator of 9. So what have we just shown here? We've just shown that if we get the fraction of the yellow pieces, and if we add the fraction of the blue pieces, we get 5 over 9. In other words, we've kept the same denominator, but then we've added the numerators to give us the total. So this is going to be the idea of when you add or subtract fractions. If you are adding or subtracting fractions with the exact same denominator, then we add or subtract the numerators, and then we keep the exact same denominator. So this idea here is reasonably straightforward. However, and I cannot emphasize this enough, this is only the case when the fractions involved have the exact same denominators. If they do not, you cannot do this process as easily as what we've just seen it here. Let's now have a look at what happens when we have fractions with different denominators. So for example, if we were to consider the addition of 1/2 plus 4/5, right now we cannot do anything with this addition because the denominators are different numbers. Now, I just want to quickly scratch off something right now that I've seen, unfortunately, far too many people get confused by in the past. What you should never, ever do in a situation like this is add across the numerators and add across the denominators. What I mean by that is a very common mistake that I've personally seen quite a bit of in my last couple of years of existence is in a situation like this, they would say 1 plus 4 is 5, and then they would say 2 plus 5 is 7. So the answer for this one is 5 over 7. This is complete baloney, and unfortunately, it will never be as simple as this. So whatever you do, if you need to make a note for yourself now, this is the best time to do it, to never ever do what I just did there. Because like I said, unfortunately, it is a very, very common occurrence that I see, especially in these early stages. So how do we deal when we want to add or subtract fractions with different denominators? Well, all we need to do is we need to use the idea of equal fractions. Very, very similar to our last video when we were working on comparing fractions. So all we need to do here is rewrite both of these fractions with the lowest common denominator. Because what this is therefore going to do is it's then going to rewrite all the fractions that you have with the exact same denominator. And then we can do the exact same thing as what we did up here. Because as soon as you have the fractions with the same denominator, you just add or subtract the numerators as you normally would, but then you need to keep the same denominator. And then of course, just like I was mentioning a couple of videos ago, whenever you're doing questions like this, whether we are talking about addition or subtraction or anything else, always make sure that a final step you take is to write your fraction in lowest terms, if it's possible. And just as a quick final note here as well, typically when we're working with questions like this, you may not always get it as straightforward as fraction plus or minus another fraction. Sometimes you may actually be working with an integer plus or minus a certain fraction. So how do we deal with this? Well, as it turns out, integers can be written as a fraction over 1. For example, 2 can be rewritten as 2 over 1. 5 can get rewritten as 5 over 1, and so on. So whenever you're doing questions like this that involve integers, you will need to rewrite the integers as a fraction over 1, which you can then manipulate using the lowest common denominator. Alrighty, with that being said, let's now have a look at a few examples of adding and subtracting fractions. First example that we're going to consider is 1/2 plus 1/3. So here we've got two different denominators. So the first thing that we need to do is rewrite both these fractions with the lowest common denominator. The lowest common denominator in this case is going to be 6. So how do we write the first fraction with the denominator of 6? We multiply the top and bottom by 3. Then with the second fraction, we're going to multiply the top and bottom by 2. Doing so, and we then get 3 over 6 plus 2 over 6. Now that both these fractions have the same denominator of 6, we can now combine this into a single fraction over 6, where the numerator will then be this one plus this one. In other words, 3 plus 2, which is 5. So our final answer here is 5 over 6. Second example to consider is 2 over 3 plus 1 over 5. Similar to the first one, fractions have different denominators, so we first of all need to rewrite both these fractions with the lowest common denominator. The lowest common denominator in this case will be 15. So we're going to multiply the first fraction, top and bottom, by 5, and then the second fraction, top and bottom, by 3. Doing so, we then end up with 10 over 15 plus 3 over 15. Our fractions now have the exact same denominator, so our answer will be a fraction over 15, and then the numerator will be this numerator plus this numerator. In other words, 13. So our answer here, 13 over 15. Last example to consider is 5 over 2 subtract 3. So the first thing that we want to do here is rewrite this integer of 3 as a fraction. Specifically, we can rewrite it as 3 over 1. Here we have two different denominators, so we need to rewrite these fractions with the lowest common denominator. The lowest common denominator of 2 and 1 is 2, so we can just keep this first fraction as it is, and then we'll multiply the top and bottom of the second fraction by 2. Doing so, we then end up with 5 over 2 take 6 over 2. These fractions now have the exact same denominator, so our answer will be a fraction over 2, and then our numerator will be this numerator take this numerator. 5 take 6 is negative 1, so our final answer is negative 1 over 2. Alrighty, let's summarize what we've learnt today. So in this video, we explored how to add and subtract fractions. When the fractions have the same denominator, the resultant fraction will have the same denominator, and the numerator will be the sum or difference of the original numerators. That is, a over c plus minus b over c is equal to a plus or minus b all over c. If the fractions do not have the same denominator, we must rewrite the fractions with denominators equal to their lowest common multiple. We can then perform a similar process as outlined above. When performing these operations, it is critical not to fall into the common trapfall of adding and subtracting the numerators and the denominators. Finally, we applied these processes to add and subtract some fractions. And that's it for now. See you in the next video.